Please welcome to the stage His Excellency Ali bin Hamad Al-Kuwari, Minister of Finance of the State of Qatar, His Excellency Mohammed Aljadaan, Minister of Finance of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and His Excellency Dr. Mohammed Sulaiman Jasser, Chairman of the Islamic Development Bank Group, for a conversation with Bloomberg's Joumanna Bercetche.
Well, I'm delighted to be here. Welcome back from the break. We're going to be talking about reshaping Middle East economies, and I was just having a chat with their excellencies off stage about how much the region has changed over the last decade. The last time I came to Doha was in 2009, so it really is unrecognizable versus what it was back then. So we are going to have a conversation about what the likes of Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and then more broadly, what countries within the GCC can do to accelerate this transformation, keep going with it, with the view of working towards a more inclusive and sustainable growth for everyone. So Your Excellency, nobody wants to hear from me. I'm going to start with you straight away. Qatar National Vision 2030 has been the economic backbone for the trajectory of the Qatari economy. And I would like to get sort of just an update on how the program is going, especially because now we're out of the World Cup. There was a lot of activity into and out of the World Cup. How you see things panning out in the next few years, and also really what sectors are going to be driving growth.
Thank you, Joumanna. Pleased to be with you here today, and I'd like to welcome all of our guests, here in Doha. As His Excellency the Prime Minister mentioned this morning, we are embarking in the last phase of our journey toward the 2030 vision. And we had, previously, when we made the vision, there were three phases. The first phase was focusing in creating national champions, the Qatar Investment Authority, QMBs, Ooredoo, all the national champions which help us to build the brand for the country. So that was the first phase. Second phase, we invested more than 300 billion riyals in state-of-the-art infrastructure for the country. And this is something that, for the rail, airport, ports, roads, everything. And we had a big event, World Cup, FIFA 2022. When you have such a mega event, it helps you to accelerate some of your, plans. So much of our infrastructure was helped to be accelerated during, for the World Cup, event. But what we should know, everybody talks about the World Cup finish, what you're going to do next, and it's normal, But what we have done, and all of this one, we're building for the Qatar future. What we are doing is for Qatar, it's not for the World Cup. So World Cup, only an event that helped us to accelerate. So now, beyond the 2022, we continue our journey and focusing more about economical diversification, about enabling the private sector, about changing the policies, the ease of doing business, focusing in key sectors, and balancing between our plans between developing human capital, health, education, technology, environmental, and sustainability. So it's, building all of these ones. And the key sectors we're going to be focusing on are four key sectors we're going to be focusing on in terms of making a difference: logistics, ICT, manufacturing, and tourism. But we are going to be using enabling sectors. Financial sector, for example, is going to be one of the strong enablers to achieve these goals. Education, health, building, and the human development aspect. And the human is really what matters at the end of the day, because your success can be attributed only to human capital development. So for our 2030, and our target to grow the non-hydrocarbon by 4% a year, for the next, 6 years until 2030. Already, this is our plans, although, in the same time also, I think we must say that the energy itself, the energy sector is performing very well. And we have announced, big expansion in our LNG productions. Our friend in the Ministry of Energy, they announced that we're going to be increasing Qatar's, production by 85% in a phased manner until 2030, we are going to be reaching 142 million tons per annum. So, I mean, they're going to make it difficult for us to diversify the economy, but but definitely, this goes hand in hand because we believe LNG will be, a transit energy for a long time, and and this is going to help us, to bring in, the fund that's going to be invested in our, Vision 2030 and also in our Future Generation Fund.
Yeah. Well, two things I've got to say. The first is, for me, I'm going to hear about the World Cup forever because I'm married to an Argentinian. So that's the first point. But
congratulations.
The second point is, what you were saying about new sources of energy. I know new oil fields are coming online in, the next couple of years. What are you going to do with that funding? Is it going to go into the sectors that you just described?
We have a broadened, fiscal policy framework, and this is something we have developed and, agreed in the country, where we really, have a long view on the budget and on the fiscal, and under different scenarios, revenue scenarios, So what we do, when we decide, we have a formula, a very fixed formula, like part of the funds, to support the budget, reduce debt, invest on Qatar Investment Authority, enhance Qatar Central Bank reserves, and build also a cushion for future, volatility of the market. So basically, we have a very clear view. It's like, our book, when it comes to fiscal sustainability, for the country.
Your Excellency, let me ask you about Saudi Vision 2030. We're more than halfway through, and there are some very noticeable achievements that you can point to. Huge increase in the female participation rates, big growth in the non-oil sector, shift away from hydrocarbons. But now we hear more about some spending constraints. And I just wonder, as you get into the latter half of this vision, what are going to be the key priorities?
First of all, thank you very much, Joumanna, and thank you, Your Excellency, and thanks to the State of Qatar for having us. I've always enjoyed, actually, this forum, and I've always enjoyed Qatar and the Qatari people. I was driven by the most expensive driver last night or the night before, His Excellency, taking a quick tour around Doha. And it's really impressive when he spoke about the infrastructure spend that went into Qatar and how the next stage is going to be actually reaping the benefits of that spend. I think the potential is very serious. Going back, and for those who are wondering why His Excellency and I are wearing this, because on stage you actually sometimes don't hear the conversation. Few things, I think, before going into Saudi, I think the world economy is going through a very serious challenges, and we are part of that world. And we need to make sure, as His Excellency Abu Ahmed mentioned, we need to make sure that we are prepared. We came to this few years back, almost at the same time, whether it is in Qatar, in Saudi, in the UAE, and the rest of the GCC. Oman followed even aggressively from an era where we have always been seen as the resource-rich countries and largely dependent on revenues from these natural resources. But that also is a curse. Because if you are dependent on one resource, then you are actually being held hostage of how that resource is performing. And then you go into this volatility of how oil or gas prices move, and the fact that your spend also will be dependent on the revenue. So Vision 2030 came as a response. It's actually transforming the whole nation to make sure that we are a diversified and sustainable economy. That is a mission that actually the rest of the GCC are going through. So it's not only Saudi Arabia, it's the rest of the GCC are actually marching towards a proper, sustainable, diversified economy that enables the private sector, utilizes our demography of young population who are technology savvy, who can actually be the entrepreneurs, the inventors, the investors, the leaders of the future. Back to Vision 2030, I think without really going into a lot of the areas that Vision 2030 covers, just focusing on the fiscal and economic side, when we started in 15, 16, we had a very difficult revenue base, for example. Non-oil revenue covers short of 10% of our total expenditure. And we really needed to do something very drastic to improve our non-oil revenues. Now, only in the past 7 years, we moved from 10% to about 37%. That's significant. Our non-oil GDP has now reached the stage where it actually represents about 50% of our economy. Our unemployment, when we started Vision 2030, was about 12.3. Today, it achieved actually the target for 23 of 8%. Now it is 7.7. We are very close to our 2030 target of 7%. Women participation, you mentioned, we had a target of 30% by 2030. We achieved that in 22, and we are moving now to 36%, and we upgraded that target. Employment in the private sector, because generally in the GCC, governments used to be the employer, the key employer. That is changing. We have 2.3 million employees now in the private sector, the highest ever in the Saudi history. And I can go on, but there are real serious results that are giving us clear momentum. We are not complacent. Obviously, we need to push through the momentum of reforming and transforming the economy, but we see the results. The last point you mentioned, and I'll try to be as short as I can. Obviously, when we started, we did not have COVID. We did not have inflation. We did not have incredibly high interest rates around the world and cost of funding. We did not have the war in Europe. We did not have the war in the Middle East. We did not have the disruptions in the Red Sea. We did not have the disruptions in the supply chain. And that then, all of these collective shocks that are facing the world calls us also to reprioritize, to look at what we are doing and how can we actually optimize what we are doing, optimize our plans. It's not actually the funding that is the constraint. The funding is one part, but it is not the part, to be honest. It's actually the economic leakage. Because if you spend under the current circumstances of serious inflation pressures around the world and serious increasing cost of funding, you are just going to cause two things. One, more inflation and overheating your economy. But second, which is also as important, possibly the most important, is leakage.
Yeah.
If you don't allow your economy to catch up with your projects, basically what will happen is you will import a lot more, and you will not allow your economy, your private sector to catch up and build their factories, manufacturing facilities, service providers to actually support the projects that you are building. So giving it more time is actually wise, and scaling it so that it actually builds on each other in terms of interconnectedness for you to build the tourism sector. By the way, tourism, for example, we achieved our 2030 target of more than 100 visitors. So you just need to make sure that you sequence it, reduce the leakage, economic leakage, and give your economy and the private sector a breather so that they can catch up.
I just want to pick up on the point about funding there. When I look at the total value of the giga projects that Saudi have in the pipeline, I've seen estimates ranging from $850 billion to $1.5 trillion. These are very big numbers. And the question people always ask is, can Saudi actually deliver on those plans if the oil price drops? What happens if the price of oil drops?
I think that the whole idea of Vision 2030 is actually to respond to this question. We have been actually very conservative in our assumptions when it comes to our oil revenues. I'll give you just one basic example. In the year 23, we closed the year 23 with oil revenues that are more than what we have projected in the budget at the beginning of 23, despite the fact that prices were down by about 20% and oil production was down by 17%, which basically tells you that we are not optimists when it comes to projecting and therefore committing our spend to what the revenue is. We are very conservative. So I'm quite comfortable with, for two reasons. One is we diversified our revenues. As I said, now 37 are coming from non-oil. And we are very conservative in our projections and therefore our plans on how the oil revenue will cover that expenditure.
Your Excellency, let me put the next question to you about how important do you think it is for countries of the region to continue with this diversification push? And to what extent do you think what Qatar is doing, what Saudi Arabia is doing, could serve as a template for other countries as well?
Again, thank you very much for the opportunity. Thank you, Your Excellency. Thank you, Qatar, for this wonderful get-together. I think the GCC countries, after 4 decades of trying to create this economic gathering, if you will, or this economic front in the world, I think it's coming to fruition now. I think His Excellency, the Qatari Minister of Finance, alluded to that we are now more seen from the outside as one bloc that has cohesive policies, complementary policies to move forward and to really be a beacon of economic growth and development, not only for the region, but beyond. We were not, in my early years in the economic field, we were not taken seriously. We were just, an oil well and some camels, and that's it. Well, we have news now. We have all of that, because we're still proud of our camels, by the way. But we have a lot more also that we have been able to build. Our demographics are not talked about enough. Our demographics are probably the greatest asset, even more than oil, for the GCC. The GCC invested in its own students, in its own youth, a lot. I mean, I used to call my generation the oil boomers. Like in the US, they have the baby boomers. We are the oil boomers, because when the oil boom came, the government sent us overseas, all over the world, to go and study and come back and participate in the development of our countries. And that's why you will see in the GCC, you can't even differentiate between the countries and the human resource base, because they all followed very similar trajectories to these developments. So I think what Minister Aljadaan also mentioned, resilience is probably now what distinguishes the GCC economies. And that resilience has emanated from what has already been mentioned, but Mr. Aljadaan mentioned 3 that I think are critical and they have to be kept under watch. First, diversification of revenues. To be able to reach 37% as non-oil revenue, that's quite an achievement. Very important achievement. Second, women's participation. More than 36% participation rate for women in the labor force. And then the third one is the non-oil exports of Saudi Arabia. They now represent also around 36% of our imports, because you need those exports in order to finance your import. That is keeping oil aside. So the The resilience, I think, is very, very important, and the GCC countries seems to be together moving in that direction, and now they are much greater believers in their own abilities now, which is very important. It's pride, not arrogance, but pride, because we have invested and we have proven that our investments were really in the right direction.
Okay, so because I'm a journalist, I'm going to ask you what you think the potential roadblocks are. And we talk about the plans, the ambitions that you have, the transformation, and the successes that you've had along the way. But there are a couple of potential hurdles. One of them is, in the case of Qatar, perhaps the construction sector out of the World Cup, imported monetary policy from the US. We see very tight credit conditions that's having an effect on liquidity. What do you see as a potential roadblock to the implementation?
I mean, some of these challenges not only apply to Qatar, but maybe, more the global economies as well. But, you mentioned it, Joumanna, the high interest rate environment, is really a big challenge, and the high dollars. Although maybe it could be more challenging for other countries than Qatar, itself, because, we follow the dollar, although our economy is different. The structure of our economy is different than the structure of the U.S. economy, because, U.S. economy have been raising rates to fight inflation, while inflation in Qatar is not an issue. Last March, we achieved 1.1% inflation, which is the lowest in 3 years in Qatar, and we should expect the same levels. But because of, the bag of the currency, we had to follow, and again, to avoid any arbitrage business, with the currency. So, but this is definitely is a challenge for the region as a whole, not, as I say, specifically for Qatar, but could be also for the private businesses is a challenge. We see also the geopolitical, definitely. I think this is our maybe biggest challenge, as we go along. And, although, we see an unrested region, the war in Gaza, we have, some civil unrest like in Yemen and Sudan. These are all, also imposing, some difficulties on the routes and the logistics, and also it's having some economical impact, and also there are a possibility of escalating, which is also going to be a bigger challenges for us. So we see this too. Again, inflation also we should highlight inflation and commodity prices. Although, as I said, we could be a beneficial in one side, because we are, energy prices helps our economies, but it will be difficult for other, Middle Eastern countries who are importer of energy, for example, or importer of other commodities. So we see these are really challenges and hurdles, and we should work together, as countries, as also work with the multilateral organizations to see how to ease up, these difficulties,
Yeah. Your Excellency, I also want to ask you about, you're telling the story of Saudi Arabia, very compelling, both of you. To what extent has that also been backed up by the amount of foreign direct investment, FDI, that is coming into this part of the world and into Saudi Arabia as well? Has the FDI that has come in matched your own ambitions?
Let me just comment first on His Excellency's. I think I agree totally with His Excellency. I would add two points which are very important, particularly for the GCC. One is, while there is a downside of being actually pegged to the US dollar, particularly on the interest rate side, but you cannot have your cake and eat it also. So you also possibly need to take that into consideration, but there is actually significant benefits of stability, investor actually not taking any risk on currency. But more importantly, we don't actually import a lot of goods and services from the US. And with interest rate rising, the dollar actually gets stronger, which gives us a lot of leverage when we import from other countries. So what we imported from Japan or from Europe or the rest of Asia, that costed us, 130 3 years ago, now is costing us 100 because of their currency depreciation against the dollar, which is also against our currency. So we also need to take that into consideration. There are a lot of benefits that one will need to look at.
So the peg is staying?
I think basically there is a lot of benefits. So even though there are possibly some challenges, but we actually are gaining a lot more benefits than what we are losing. Second, in terms of how we should deal with the challenges that are facing the world and also internally, I think it's just an opportunity also, an angle. And you could see that in a lot of activities that are picking up in this region, simply because it's a region that is actually a bright spot amongst very few in the world today. And people always talk about the flavor of the month. Actually, I don't want to sound too large-headed, but actually we will be the flavor of decades. We are determined, we have long-term plans, and we are very clear and committed on our commitment to the investment community at large. I'm not talking about one individual country, but at large in the GCC, that we mean business, that we are willing to take every step possible to make it easier for investors to do business in the region, that we are willing to do a lot of structural changes, including actually making it very predictable, very consistent policies, no surprises. I mean, a lot of us now actually publishes before, go and do consultation with the investment community before you change any law. These are very needed prerequisites for investors to be comfortable to invest. Is the FDI enough? I can tell you in the GCC, we are definitely significantly above the average worldwide. FDI worldwide is actually shrinking. We are growing. Not as much as we wanted. We are still very ambitious and we wanted more, but we are definitely a lot better than the average in the world.
Your Excellency, final question to you. I've got about a minute, but I would just say to you, I would just ask you, how important is it that countries of the GCC actually collaborate together?
It's most important, as I said, and their Excellencies also emphasized. The GCC now, at the risk of bragging, is a beacon of hope for the whole region and globally, I think, because of the resilience of their economies, because of the consistent policies they have been following together, because of the demographic dividend that they are reaping now, because of the youth. Entrepreneurship, I've never seen it in my life, and it's been long. I've never seen as much talk about entrepreneurship and the youth really going into this line of business than ever before. So I think the stars are very well aligned for the GCC. And we are moving. I think our leaderships see eye to eye on the most important issues. That's very important because it's all about signaling also. Mm-hmm. It's not the money you have. It's what signaling are you giving the market, to the domestic investor, to the external investor. And I think those signals are very, very brilliant, but also very visible to a lot, particularly domestically. And that's why I think the social peace and the focus on the domestic concerns and the domestic development, taking such a great role in the policies of these governments, is really sending the right signals and augurs very well for the future of this region. And this region has been very generous also. I'm the chairman and the president of the Islamic Development Bank. This region has been very generous with these institutions that go and help those that are less fortunate. We have put, and sorry to pitch this in, we just celebrated our 50th anniversary, our Golden Jubilee, in Riyadh just 2 weeks ago. The first 50 years, we have financed projects for more than $182 billion. We're proud of that, yeah. And we look forward to do more, and thanks partly to the generosity of the GCC countries. So they are very focused on development, not only in their countries, but in the beyond.
That is an excellent way to leave it. Your Excellencies, thank you so much.
Thank you.